Hello. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ubuntu Summit 2022. Very happy to see you all here. Also very happy to welcome the audience tuning in from home. So we have a long day ahead, so let's get started. Our first talk is from Philipp Kewisch, a community leader at Canonical.
Good morning, everyone. Did you have a great time last evening? Yeah. I hope everyone who got a delayed flight or arrived a little bit later had a good night's sleep. Are you excited for this week? You took a long trip on you for that level of excitement? Come on. Let's try this again. Are you excited? Wow. I'm impressed. So welcome to the very first Ubuntu Summit. I'm really happy to see you all here, and also quite excited about how many people are joining us remotely. I want to talk to you today a little bit about why we're holding the Ubuntu Summit and how we got there. When I joined Canonical earlier this year, Ubuntu Summit was but a concept. We knew we wanted to get the community together, and we knew it was the right time is now. Ubuntu has such a vast ecosystem, and we're well aware the only way to build large-scale open source software is to do it together. Now, how do you do that when it's not just one product that you stand for, but you rely on the passion and dedication of many others in the ecosystem? We have upstream projects that provide the desktop experience that's most visible. We have a number of downstream distributions that have found their niche and are exploring ways to make Ubuntu better. We have people who are passionate about translating into their language, and others who would like to customize their experience. We have hardware vendors and software companies who are building their success on Ubuntu. There are many more examples than I could possibly count right now, but they all have something in common. They believe in Ubuntu's success. Now, how do you get such a diverse group behind a common purpose to strive for improvement? We can certainly collaborate through bug trackers and mailing lists and forums, sync our releases, or contribute to each other's projects. Each project within the ecosystem could certainly just, celebrate their wins and call it a day. But the larger the ecosystem grows, the more there's tension, fragmentation, and inevitably disagreement. You might quickly find yourself in an argument because someone is wrong on the internet. Others might be dismissive just based on your affiliation. But we cannot let that get in the way of our common purpose. We need to remind ourselves about the spirit of Ubuntu, showing care and concern for our neighbors. We all are, because we are. By having you all here today, all the people around the world participating remotely, we as a group are about to write the next chapter in community collaboration. This week, you will hear individual stories that will blow your mind. You will have conversations that extend beyond the scope of what you or your company are working on. You will tear down the walls between competitors. You will create friendly bonds that will outlast your current field of interest, or reconnect with those whose advice and guidance you've appreciated in the past. Even just this is a great reason to hold an Ubuntu Summit, getting together. But what really led us to create the Ubuntu Summit is an urge to get better together. So we set out on a journey to create an event that is crafted entirely about the most important part of the Ubuntu community, you. We wanted to create an amplifier for great ideas to get you excited about what's happening in the ecosystem. This will ultimately lead to everyone here achieving more. So talk to each other about your ideas, disagree with each other just to find a solution that's even better. So, show of hands. Who in this room is at an Ubuntu Summit for the first time? Not everyone. Really? Has there been an Ubuntu Summit somewhere between the last UDS and now that I didn't know of? Oh, man. Okay. So what about the UDS? Who's been at the UDS? Nice. I want you all to remember these people. They hold the historical knowledge that will be valuable in conversation. To make smart decisions in the future, it's important to understand where we come from. Looking back over the past 10 years, Ubuntu has changed, as has its community. 10 years ago, you might have gotten together with your friends to set up an Ubuntu server in your basement, iron out the driver settings, and hack together support for that weird peripheral that your friend Dave bought from Radio Shack. Anyone remember the QCat? It was a great toy, I loved it. But times have changed. You can get an Ubuntu with just a few clicks in the cloud. Community is much less about the operating system itself, and even more about all the amazing things you can do on Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the #1 choice for data scientists worldwide. Ubuntu runs on an astonishing number of servers and IoT devices that make your life a lot easier. There's a whole ecosystem around various ways to make Ubuntu accessible through desktop environments. When we're thinking about community, we therefore need to shift our thinking. When you think about what it is you're exceptionally good at, why is Ubuntu the #1 choice? And with that, I don't mean singing Bohemian Rhapsody yesterday at the karaoke bar. Though, even so, maybe Ubuntu Studio is your #1 choice there. Now think about what isn't quite working well. Little did you know, you've just taken the first small step towards community contribution. Look around you. There are more incredibly smart people in this room that might have just been thinking the same thing. Imagine what the power of collaboration can do to solve these issues. But you will only know if you get together and talk about it. This week is your chance. I'd like you all to use this time to not only learn about some of the interesting things happening with Ubuntu and the open source technology, but also to get together and think about one small thing that you can do to make Ubuntu better. When you're standing together in a group, leave some space for someone to join the conversation. You might just have an expert join you with the missing piece of the puzzle. When we began thinking about how to map out the 3 days of sessions, we knew we'd be getting some good talk submissions. What we didn't know is the overwhelming amount of amazing content we'd receive. If we accepted everything we wanted to, we'd be here for 2 weeks. Anyone who's been at a company event for 2 weeks certainly knows what that feels like. To me, this shows how much passion you all have about the different ways to use Ubuntu and open source. You have so many amazing stories to tell, so please tell the world about what it is that drives you, and together we will succeed. Before we get into some of the highlights for the week, I wanted to give Mark a chance to tell us more about a thing called UDS and provide his perspective on the Ubuntu Summit. But first, let's get a round of applause for those who are making the Ubuntu ecosystem exceptional. All of you.
All right. Hello, everybody. How's this working? Can you hear me at the back okay? What a treat to be here in Prague with all of you. Thank you for making the trip. It is my greatest pleasure to host you here. And I'm extremely excited for what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to achieve, and what we're going to enable other people to do with open source. I want to start by thanking the people who got us here, so Mauro and Philipp. But behind Mauro and Philipp, there's also Britt, who was on that team and set up a lot of the infrastructure that we use to coordinate what we're going to do. And on the EA team, we had Jay and Sarah, who for many of you handled the logistics of getting you here. So please just give them a quick round of applause just for getting this thing going. we have people here from at least 37 different countries. And I find that just wonderful, right? The open source and technology and the internet are making the world flat. And by that, I mean, in a very fundamental way, they're making the world fair, right? It was an extraordinary, extraordinary thing to me to see the spread of innovation that was powered by open source, right? It was extraordinary to see. When I grew up, innovation happened in a very few places in the world, right? There were some famous places, and it always seemed like all the innovation was coming from those places. Today, thanks to the internet and, very importantly, open source, I see innovation happening everywhere. And for me, it is a deeply important principle to unlock and unblock innovators wherever they happen to be on the planet, right? So I want to thank people who've come from Zimbabwe, people who've come from Colombia, people who've come from the Czech Republic, not very far, but still. It's a trip. People who've come from Turkey, from Senegal, from Peru, from Israel, from Japan. That's a lot of time zones. That's a lot of layovers. That's a lot of hours of jet lag, right? But it is you that kind of represent the future of open source. It is you that represent the fullness of the possibility that I think we want to be part of unlocking. Now, Philipp asked the question, but I'll ask it again. Who remembers UDS? Who remembers UDS? UDS is legendary, right? UDS was this sort of insane melting pot of canonical, community, roadmap, things that were going to happen, things that could never possibly happen, right? A lot of things that should never have happened. UDS has a really special place in my heart. But an important thing to know is that this is not UDS, right? This is not UDS. This is a new event. This is an event that we are going to design and shape and found effectively together, and which I think is going to go on into the future. And it has to have its own character, its own sprint, right? Its own DNA and its own legends. So I want to thank you for helping us start this new event, right? And I'll tell you, when you do something like that, no one person gets to shape it and define it. In reality, we will all shape it and define it. But I'll tell you what's important about it for me, right? Let me start by saying how I think we've set this event up to be different. And the first is that while UDS was about both Canonical and the community, right? This is purely about the people who are leading open source beyond Canonical's ambitions, beyond the things that we think in Canonical we can drive. And here's why I think that's so important. To me, this is about paying it forward. This is about unlocking people who have different ideas to me, different ideas to the leadership of Canonical, and figuring out how we can enable and empower those people to address things that are potentially deeply important to people that Canonical will never reach, potentially deeply important to Canonical in the future, but most importantly, not constrained by what one company can achieve or what one company wants to achieve, right? So to me, it is really, really important that this room and going forward, this event represents a much wider range of open source ambition, right? And a much wider range of perspectives on what open source could be in the world. As Philipp said, Canonical folks have been here for 2 weeks, We had our first week is what we call our product sprint. And so that brings together engineering leads and product managers and people who work every day with customers, people who work every day with partners, right? And in that event, we're trying to figure out what's the backbone of our work over the next 6 months as part of a bigger picture, which spans LTS to LTS, the 2-year release cycle, right? And after that week, which is a pretty exhausting week, we then hosted all of Canonical Engineering, 500 people. It's quite incredible to me that Canonical has grown to the point where we can host an engineering event of 500 people, right? Trying to deliver the very, very best platform for innovators all over the world, put the very, very best foot forward for open source in the world, right? We did that last week. That means that we have 90% of a plan, right? We have 90% of a backbone, and this is your opportunity to take that and use it as a springboard. Use it as a springboard to do things that we wouldn't have thought of doing, or that we wouldn't have the energy to do, or that we don't yet understand, but which you do understand, you do believe in, and you can lead, right? So in talking about this event, Philipp and I were trying to find sort of a key common theme. And for me, it was about celebrating innovators all over the world who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible with open source, right? And figuring out what we can do in Ubuntu to enable them to be the next generation and to underwrite the future in important ways. I love this saying from the world of science fiction, that the future is here already, right? It's just not evenly distributed. And my goal for this summit is that we try to bring the people who in their minds can see that future, right? It may not be a future that I see. It may not be a future that is particularly important for Canonical, but it is a future that's important to the world. And I hope that in this event, we can enable the people who are going to write that future to do it faster, more efficiently, more easily, right? And to do it in a way that is more consumable to the world, more resilient, more reliable, and more impactful. So this is an opportunity to celebrate those people, to you. This is an opportunity to share ideas, to network. It's an opportunity to rally to excellence, right? The people who get up on stage with lightning talks or with presentations, who have things that are inspiring, it's our opportunity to rally to them and to figure out how we can support them, how we can make that future happen faster and better. So there are people here who are going to talk about a very, very wide range of topics. They're going to be people talking about the Windows subsystem for Linux, which is just a radical, wonderful, new kind of way of thinking about where open source can have an impact and make a difference. And if it wasn't already in your schedule, I would encourage you to come to Till's talk this week, where he's going to talk about saving Windows printing using WSL. There are people here who are artists, right? The folks from Ardor. Who's here from Ardor? Who's here from Ubuntu Studio? So it's wonderful to me that there are at least 2 groups focused on artistry and music and sound. And this should be a forum where essentially we figure out how to make platforms for artists. There are folks here talking about Flutter. Where's the Flutter? A couple of hands for Flutter. Yes, a really beautiful cross-platform development environment. So, figuring out how to get the best of Flutter on Linux and bring the best of Linux to Flutter. There are people here talking about Docker images. Who's here for Docker images of one flavor or another, right? There are people here talking about the experience of makers. Where are the cutie pie folks? Other folks who would associate with makers? Martin. You're not alone, Martin. May feel that way some days, but you're not alone. Robotics. Who's here for robotics? Right? Yes, the non-human future. Who's here for the knitting? What the actual? I am so going to come to that session. Right, gaming, supercomputers, documentation, KDE, GNOME, Unity, cloud, Kubernetes, distributed systems, security, right? This is a crazy thing to say, but I really believe it. Open source is just getting started, right? It's 30 years old, and it's just getting started. Open source, Wikipedia, the sum of our knowledge, the sum of our expertise, just imperative, right? The imperative to add to that body of knowledge and that body of expertise. That's what we're about. So as a community, so to be clear, for me, the winner is open source. It's not Ubuntu, it's not Canonical. The winner of this generation is open source. That's what I'm backing, right? But if you actually want to get involved, you have to be involved somewhere. And so for us, that's the broader Ubuntu community, right? And that's not the whole of open source, right? I think the people who have a different view of the fundamentals of the platform are really important too, if you actually care about the whole of open source, right? Our Canonical's competitors are really important. I like them, I respect them, I'm grateful for them in lots of cases, in lots of ways, right? And competition's fun, right? In this room, our diversity of interests, of enthusiasms, of passions, of perspectives, right? That makes us more relevant as a community, right? It makes me believe that the things that I'm fighting for and investing in and working for, right, and trying to solve will have a bigger impact in the world than they would if it was just me and Canonical, right? They make us more relevant. They make us more resilient, right? In a world which is changing, in a world where you never get everything right, in a world which will always surprise you, right? Our diversity of interests in this room and as an Ubuntu community make us more resilient and they make us more relevant. I feel we owe it to people who want to take open source to new audiences to help them to do that. If your audience is scientists, I think that's great. If it's artists, if it's humanities, if it's space, right? If it's classrooms, if it's universities, if it's governments, right? Whether you're interested in architecture or urban planning, and you think open source can make a difference in those things, right? It is this diversity of interests that amplifies the impact that all of us are having in the world. Now, Canonical will not do the work for you if you want to lead something like that, right? How could we? Right? But what we should do, and my commitment to you, is that we will enable you and empower you to work alongside us, to build alongside us, right? On the basis that a diversity of interests makes us all more resilient, makes us all more relevant. Also to remember that what we share makes us more effective, makes us stronger, right? We share a set of bugs, right? If I fix one of those bugs, everybody here gets the benefit of that fix, right? That's why communities form, and that's why communities can span interests, right? It's not like we all agree, but we do agree on what we share, right? It's what we share that makes us stronger, sharing the foundation, sharing the tools. None of them are perfect, right? We share Debs. You'd be a lunatic to argue that Debs are perfect, right? We share Snaps. You'd be a lunatic to argue Snaps are perfect. We share Launchpad. Just saying, right? But the reality is, in what we share, we find solutions to problems that we also share, right? And we find the opportunity to kind of springboard off other people's work, right? Every community is ultimately defined by the things it shares. You may want to agree on more with your fellows in the community. You may want to agree on everything, but then you wouldn't be very diverse. You wouldn't ultimately be very resilient. You wouldn't ultimately be very relevant, right? So there's a lovely expression to say, like, keep your identity small, right? Keep your identity small, but keep it focused and believe in it, right? Our identity needs to be relatively small, right? But it does need to be focused, and it needs to be something that we all invest in and share. Okay, whatever you're building, I hope that it will be a little bit orange. And I hope that the orange bits will be the bits that you can really rely on, and the things that act as an amplifier, as a springboard, as a catalyst to whatever future gadget, thing, capability, software, solution you want to bring about in the world. Thank you for coming here, and thank you for the ideas and contributions and challenges that you're going to bring here. And I hope you have a really wonderful 3 days in Prague. Right. We have time for Q&A. Yeah? We have a little time for Q&A. Comments, observations, sharings. Who wants to break the ice? Martin. You like Launchpad? Whoa. I quite like Launchpad too. So to be clear, we're investing in Launchpad again, because I see it as critical infrastructure, right, to help us solve a problem that we kind of uniquely have, right, which is this aggregation of software and this desire to do things that span boundaries and communities. Martin, do you still need that? Yeah? Okay. Yes, we got over here.
Hi. So continuing on that note, right now Ubuntu development is spread over GitLab, GitHub, Launchpad, and things like that. Can you tell a bit more about whether there's any effort within Canonical to change that in any way, to try to get a more cohesive platform for development?
Yeah, I can tell you that, and I think it's fairly well known, that I do think that communities that share tools become more effective, right? There's this very difficult thing where at some level we all feel like we would be more effective if we could just do everything exactly the way we wanted it. Who's had that feeling in life, right? We all have that feeling, right? But in reality, think about it, then you're also agreeing to be a thing where everybody else is imposing everything that they like, which you don't like, on you. Right? Like those two are exactly the same proposition about the way you work, right? If you want to work in a way where you do everything exactly the way you would prefer it, then you're also agreeing to be in a place where everybody else is asking you to do everything exactly the way they prefer it. So this is this tough thing. As a community, we need to invest in tooling that we share. The cold truth is that Canonical went through a brutal reality check in 5 years. I can honestly say the most difficult thing that I think I've ever had to go through, right? And I really want to credit and celebrate the people at Canonical who kind of powered us through that period to the point where now we are growing, investing, and building. And on the back of that, you can take it from me that I will invest in shared tooling for all of us, right? So that we have a better springboard, right? Launchpad is part of that, as are other tools. the same time, our impact, remember I said open source is really the thing that I believe in, right? And open source is bigger than Canonical, bigger than Ubuntu, right? And so therefore, part of that investment has to be to play well with others, right? Launchpad at the very beginning said, hey, let's build a bug tracker which will span communities. Let's build a revision control system before Git, which can span communities, right? These are deeply held beliefs, and they're beliefs that I think it's important for us to return to and invest in, right? I put the pressure on Canonical to come together and make sure that we experience the same set of bugs so that we're all motivated to fix the same set of bugs, right? That's been a little challenging over the last couple of years, but now as we come out of that, you know where I stand, right? Other questions? Try to get ahead of the questions so that we can TikTok them. I think there was another hand at the back there. Go ahead.
I just want to ask about this place in particular, because I'm first, like speaking for myself, I'm not used to being in such a fancy big place, and I think most open source developers are also the same. So I kind of want to ask why this specific place, the Hotel Hilton, in specific.
Why this specific place?
Yes.
Because we were 500 people last week and we needed at least 500 rooms, and this place has 800. I mean, so at Canonical, I got to tell you, we work pretty darn hard, and we work from home, right? Which kind of means everybody gets a corner office, which is great. But the times that we get together are critical to the health and sanity of a distributed workforce, right? Yeah. So there's tension, right? Like, I think you wouldn't work at Canonical if you didn't want to be working at home, right? But then if you were only working at home, right, you wouldn't feel part of something much, much bigger, right? So for me, it's really, really important that everyone at Canonical makes a commitment twice a year to get together, not just with their own team, but with lots of other teams. And I love watching the kind of experiences that people have, because people who've just joined the company are working inside one team for up to 6 months, working on one problem, and then suddenly they realize, wow, I'm in the middle of all of these interesting, potent, difficult, important threads, right? And that's really important. The pandemic, you'd think that the pandemic would be really easy for a remote-first organization. It wasn't. It really wasn't, right? And I can tell you, we really missed this feeling of getting together, right? And working stuff out in person, reaffirming our commitments and our relationships in person, right? So, so how do we make that work? How do we make that work? Well, what I think is fun is that we try to pick interesting places, right? This is a very interesting place for lots of different reasons, right? First, lots of James Bond movies have been shot here over the years, right? And second, beer is cheaper than water. And third, the non-alcoholic beer is very good. So it seems like there are lots of great reasons to be here. And when we're in a place, we need a venue where we can all be together. Right? All right, next question.
So how would you consider our relationship to be with Debian at the moment? Do you consider it stronger than ever? Do you consider Debian being, so with Debian being an upstream of Ubuntu, do you consider our relationship to be stronger now than it was? If so, how?
So I think that relationship has gone through highs and lows, as any sort of big complex relationship does. You know, I consider myself a Debian developer. I consider Debian one of the critical communities and kind of structural pieces of kind of open source magic that really, really matter in the world, right? And in fact, in the 90s, as I was kind of watching the early kind of drama of Linux distributions and the battle for kind of headspace in the Linux distribution world happened, I was totally convinced that Debian was just going to be the thing that everybody used. And the most interesting thing about that is that I was wrong, right? Like I became a DD, I think in 1996, maybe 1995. And technically, socially, culturally, it just seemed like it was the right way to build the distribution. And I still think that's true, right? And in fact, it was only nearly 10 years later after watching the way the world was responding to Linux that I came to understand that, in fact, you know, when we take our understanding of the world and we project it into others, we often make mistakes, right? And it took a while for me to realize that other people don't necessarily want from a Linux what I wanted from a Linux, right? And so it became clear to me that, in fact, Debian would be stronger if it had an orange wing, right? It's a terrible analogy, but, you know, freedom-fighting organizations, aka terrorist groups, often have political wings, you know, right, who essentially fight the same fight, but from a different perspective, right? And in a sense, in a very real sense, it is important to me that Ubuntu stay aligned with Debian, right, in deep ways, so that we can fight the same fight, right, from different perspectives. This is my way, remember, of backing open source, as much as backing a company, as much as backing one community. Right? That's not an unconditional offer of support. It's dangerous to write blank checks, right? But I think Debian continues to be an organization and a community that really defines to the very, very, very highest levels things that are important, and they deserve our support. So that's my perspective. In practical terms, I suspect there are more DDs who work for Canonical today than there have ever been in the past, which is one metric, right? And we literally do contribute more, I suspect, now than we ever have done in the past. We've also taken difficult choices we disagreed with in order to stay aligned with Debian. Again, that's not a blank check. I was a bit frustrated, in fact, when a senior Debian developer said, "Ha, got you. I made you do something you didn't want to do. And in fact, I've created a bunch of problems for Debian and for you, which you, Canonical, are now going to have to fix. And I think I'm clever as a result." Dick move, right? But communities are bigger than their scraps and their arguments, right? So I will always try to look at it from the broadest possible perspective in deciding how we drive ourselves forward, right? It's also, you know, one of the things that I think is true is that in Ubuntu, we have, with Canonical and with the community, and in a sense backed by Debian, we have an ability to move faster, right, and push forward on things that are undecidable in a more egalitarian context, right? And so, you know, there's tons of examples of cases where Canonical Ubuntu, right, have pushed forward on something that was rejected in other open source communities, including Debian. And then 5 years, 10 years, 15 years later, right, it turns out that, in fact, everybody gets comfortable with that idea, right? So sometimes you have to be willing to do things that your friends say are, you know, sometimes in very strong language, not preferred, right? Or not their choice, right? If you're not willing to do that, then you are afraid to lead, right? Leadership is a little bit scary. Who's ever been rock climbing? So you know the difference between climbing first and climbing second, right? Climbing first, the rope goes down. That means you fall a lot further, right? It means you hit the rock a lot harder. And it means where you put your hooks, your protection, like what you chose to the choices that you made on the way up, they are choices that are critical for your own survival, right? Following, still scary, still a mountain, still uphill significantly, right? But there's someone up there who hopefully has made a whole bunch of choices that keep you safe, right? It is scarier to lead. I think for those of us who have the ability and the desire and the ambition, it is important to take those risks. It's important to make those choices. And it's important to live by them, right?
Hi, Darcy from Unport. What I would like to go is back on the topic of shared tooling and investing in the shared tooling for the community. And what I always see is the focus is, okay, we talk about technologies, which is actually what brought us together here. But then at the same time, I feel that there is a big gap between how we actually perceive the impact on small businesses, medium-sized businesses.
The impact on, sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Impact on small and medium-sized businesses. Because
Small and medium what?
Businesses.
Yeah.
Right. So the way I see is like e-commerce is moving into a more distributed fashion, not necessarily be tied to just a big player. And what I'm looking here, for example, and what I like to know in Canonical's future is to enable that pathway where actually we can say, all right, we're not just focusing building great tooling as a developer, as an engineer, but actually something that allows people to actually have economic growth, because at the end, that's the biggest equalizer. But what's your thoughts on that? And like, what do you see Canonical's path on that front?
I think that's right. I think if I go back to the idea, the rallying cry, Linux for human beings, right? What was that really all about? It was about saying, look, there are thousands at the time of people who are giving of themselves incredibly generously, right? Giving of their insights, their skills to create technology. And that technology is, in a sense, failing to reach its full impact in the world because people can't use it. It's too difficult to use, right? And by people, I mean school kids. I mean people who are economically disadvantaged, poorer, right? I mean people who speak other languages, right? I mean people who are colorblind, right? Or otherwise have accessibility challenges, right? And so the very first tagline of Ubuntu was about saying, look, out of respect and admiration and awe for the work that is being done in the open source community back in the 90s, let's bring that to everybody, right? So that they can do with it what they will, so that they can bring the future forward. I think small business is important too, right? Like, just if you think about people's jobs, if you think about innovation, right? It happens much more in small places than in bigger places. If we can make open source more accessible to small business owners, right? We unleash and unlock them in important, powerful ways, right? I feel the same way about small business owners as I do about scientists, as I do about artists, right? Usability is really important, right? And making choices that are not just intellectually exciting for us, but are empowering for others, I think is part of the choice of why we want to be in this room rather than in other open source communities, right? I would think that it's something that we share. Got the mic. All right, let's take 2 more questions. Go ahead, I pick you.
It's cool, yes. Hi, Mark. So my question, I think, relates to the previous question as well. It's a bit of a PR-related question, and I haven't really thought it through, so it's an open question if you don't want to answer it. It relates to the open source metaverse. And by metaverse, I mean 3 things. Firstly, the existence of interoperable digital communities, and so, very much what we're talking about. Secondly, the digital connections between the physical and the virtual, summarized by things like digital twins, IoT, virtual worlds. And then thirdly, the development of infrastructure to support this very much more integrated world. So I've been working on this for about 2 years now, and I see people really struggling with this concept of openness, how to do this. And I see a lot of blockchain and crypto people talking about open, and in my opinion, getting it incredibly wrong. So as a stalwart of the open source community, do you have any words of wisdom to help us figure this out and tackle these misunderstandings and how the open metaverse could really look like?
It's a really interesting question. There seems to be a theme that kind of hounds me, or maybe it's just a theme that I'm very interested in, which is trust. Like what is the nature of trust? When I was a student, the internet was just getting started, right? It spread down to Cape Town, and it was there. It just wasn't evenly distributed, right? And I was very interested in the question of how people would come to trust each other to transact, right? Small business on the internet, but also to communicate privately on the internet. And that was kind of the first wave of crypto. There were some great, crazy, but brilliant Australians that had started OpenSSL, and they were giving the world technology that's still pretty critical to almost everything that we do on the internet, right? For better or worse, right? And I built a business on top of OpenSSL, essentially, that was all about trying to solve one part of the trust problem, which was, who are you actually talking to? Right? Just that, who are you actually talking to? And the reason that was successful is because I knew that a German would be better at understanding how to assess and decide the truth, right, of German corporate identity than a South African or an American would, right? So I built a distributed approach. It was centralized distributed. It wasn't Web3, right? It was designated people in lots of different countries who I trusted to do that work. That question keeps coming up, right? The certificate authority industry, I think, destroyed its own credibility, and now we have a new set of mechanisms for essentially internet connection trust, right? Let's encrypt and the like. And we're back to kind of fundamental questions of who do you trust? Why do you trust them? In software, this is perhaps even more important, because software that you can't trust can be totally and utterly corrosive, right? I think if you're naive about trust, you can be gutted in deep, meaningful ways, right? Financially, reputationally. We're in a sense in a very dangerous digital world, right? So this is a really, really important question. And I think, even though it's not widely understood, this is the heart of why we started working very much on better ways to encapsulate software, right? And better ways to know who the software you're running was actually coming from, right? All the things that I loved about our infrastructure, devs, and so on in the 90s are still true, and they're still important. But in a sense, those things are not enough for a world where, in fact, you need to consume software from all over the internet all the time, right? They just aren't enough. And there are some sort of very difficult, almost kind of like PhD philosophy grade problems, right? Many of the commenters on Reddit attacking this problem do not have PhDs in philosophy. One of the key tensions here is a tension between freedom to do whatever you want, right? And certainty about what it is that you're building on. And those two things are fundamentally in tension. And there is no simplistic, as far as I can tell, there is no simplistically good, universally satisfying answer. There just is none, right? If you say, look, actually, I want to be able to stick software on my laptop from any deb repo in the world, you are actually saying you have no idea who has root on your machine. That is what you're actually doing. And a lot of people don't understand that, right? So then some people say, oh, but I'm a really, really clever person. I actually do understand those choices. So, you know, you should design an entire system which lets me do that. I'm thinking, well, okay, but tell me about the consequences of those choices for people who are not as confident, who are not as self-assured, perhaps some might say not as deluded, right, about their ability to make those choices, or potentially people who have much more to lose than you do, right? And you get to this very difficult set of questions. What can we do? What should we do? Right? In the work that we're doing, there's a sort of a deep principle at heart, which is that if we want to try to do something about that, we have to expose ourselves to the risk of criticism, to the risk of making mistakes, right? Because we have to take the risk of making choices, right? There is no way that I've found to get past that, right? And every time I get into a discussion with someone, right, it comes back to those questions. What are we willing to bring to the world? Are we willing to put our own reputations on the line in order to try to make a platform where more people can go faster if they trust us, right? Think about it. When you join the Ubuntu community, you're asking people to trust you in a very, very profound way, right? An extremely profound way. The same is true for us as a company, right? And so we have to be okay with that. And then we have to do as much with that trust as we can, ethically, right, to amplify the impact that we can have in the world for other people. Super interesting question. Last one. I think we just need to turn on the orange mic. Don't know that it's there we go. Yeah.
So Canonical and Ubuntu over the years have done a great job of developer advocacy, growing that developer footprint, etc. How open are you to creating playbooks and collaborating with other ecosystems to help grow not only their ecosystem, but kind of skewing it towards the Ubuntu way of doing things?
So it's an interesting question, right? Obviously, I'm sure it wasn't intended as a trap, but it is a bit of a trap, right? Like, how open are you, right? And the problem is that it gets anecdotal very quickly. Like, I can give examples of places where we've stretched or we've invested in things that aren't our own effectively. And I can give examples, and other people would give examples of places where we haven't, right? And those are all kind of like rich, complicated choices, right? I will say that I think it's really important for us to have a list of things that we put work into, that we enable, that we support, which are not things that we ourselves have chosen, right? And of course, you sort of owe us the luxury a little bit of making those choices, right? It's a little bit like, which charities do you donate to, right? If it's none, shame on you. But if it's one I disagree with, you know. So to me, it's very important to wake up feeling like some of the privileges that I have in life, some of the privileges that my colleagues have in life, are paid forward, right? And in various ways. I'll give you an example. One of the most amazing things for me is the Raspberry Pi Foundation and Eben and his team, right? And we you know what I mean? They don't run Ubuntu, right? But there are a bunch of ways in which I think about, hey, how can we help them amplify the impact that they're having in the world, right? Path they've chosen is tough, I would know, right? And I really, really admire what they've done and the way they've done it, right? And there are lots of other examples like that as well, right? Hopefully this is a forum where we'll find more and we'll accelerate more, right? I think that's a wrap. Let me say thank you very much. Have a phenomenal couple of days in Prague.
Hi, guys. So go up on stage and speak after Philipp and Mark. Sounded like a good idea back then. So how do I top that? I can't, but I can speak about the fun things, all right? So we have code of conduct, and if you want to take a QR code and have a look at that, the takeaway here is be awesome to each other and have fun. All right, chat. If you want to hang out with the people here, we have a Telegram chat. You can take the QR code. If you don't like Telegram, we are bridging on IRC and Matrix. Go to the website. You can find all the links to join the platform that you prefer. I'll let you take a picture of that. All right. Lanyard colors. So respect people that don't want to be in pictures or videos. If you see a blue lanyard, just respect them. Don't put them in their video. Social hashtag. So feel free to use our event hashtag. Show us the exciting moments of the Ubuntu Summit, but remember the blue lanyards. Group photo. Yes, tomorrow, 9 a.m. during the opening talk. Be pretty. We'll do it here in this room, so it will be easy. Eat your vegetables. Remember to have fun. Prague is a great place. There's good beers. It's a fun place. Have fun. Be safe. Camera crew. I would like to invite Ahmed from our communications team to say a few words.
Wow. Okay. First, obviously, I'd like to say thank you for everyone part of the organizing committee, and obviously Mark. I'm Ahmed. I'm part of the Canonical team. I'm mostly responsible for social media and communication, but I'm mostly here to let you know that we have world-class camera crew right there. This is both Clara and Stelia. And one of the things that I want to remind you of is they're not here to feed on your privacy. They're basically your paparazzi, right? So they're gonna help you look even more beautiful, more badass, which is difficult. I should have brought shades. You guys look amazing, by the way. But we'll be around most of the time trying to capture, so just try and act natural. There will be time with some of the fun activities for you to just, unwind a little bit. But for the most part, just remember to use the hashtag, right? And we will reshare and also make sure that your content is also on our pages. And just smile, act natural, and you guys are awesome. That's it from me. I'll see you around. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Abigail. Hello. So I want everybody to say hi to Abigail. She's our moderator for the afternoon session. I just want to invite her to say a couple of words.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to Daniele and Mauro for the invitation and for putting this event together. Ever since I got introduced to open source, I've had a firm belief that the future of open source is community. And so I'm really happy to be here to be able to contribute to such a community that's helping make the world a better place. My name is Abigail Misrenyamidogbe, and I'm affiliated with the Python software community in Africa. I'll be your moderator for the afternoon session. So if you're speaking, please do well to reach out if you need any help before your talk. Thank you, and looking forward to all the talks.
Thank you, Abigail. And now I would like to introduce you to Daniele. Daniele is our moderator for the morning session. I'm handing off the stage. Thank you. Two microphones.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Yes. I'm going to be the moderator for the morning session. I think I've been chosen because I'm regarded as very moderate. I work for Canonical, and I'm honestly, genuinely, deeply proud to be working for a company that can put on an event like this, and for the spirit in which it's been put on, that this is not something like a marketing exercise for the company. This is part of the company's DNA. And that's really special to be part of something like this. So I'd like to thank, I'm also, not just saying, I'm deeply proud in the same way of my colleagues. You've seen some of them already, and you've met some of them who have organized this, who have put this together. Don't forget that for every hour, every person hour you see on stage, there have been another 9 person hours of work that you haven't seen. So there's a lot of hidden work in an event like this, and they've done a phenomenal amount of work to make this happen. There's another way that you only see 1/10 of what things are. So Abigail was introduced a moment ago. When I was meeting people upstairs in the bar last night, I was looking at their little badges here and thinking, you know, people need badges that are about that tall to contain all the things they are and all the things they do. So Abigail, for example, is one of the organizers of the very first PyCon Africa that took place in 2019. And there are people around here, and you are some of them too, who have many things that you could add to your badges. And that's another really important part of this. Each person is so many people here in this room. So a few logistical things for you. Breakfast is downstairs, level L in the lobby. Bring your badge or your badges. Same for your lunch. This is your passport to everything. Dinner is self-organized. The self in this case, it's not the dinner that's organizing itself. It's the self is you that's organizing the dinner, just in case. In the evening, in the palm cover rooms, which are on this level, we've got knitting. Now, knitting is very fascinating for programmers. Programmers love knitting. If you haven't tried knitting, then I think you'll probably enjoy that. Programming and textiles share a history. Carlin is on the same level, is that correct? Yes, rooms Carlin 1 to 4, they're open for BOFs, bird of a feather sessions. That's where people with some kind of common interest can just gather together for whatever purpose they wish associated with that common interest. Birds of a feather. This says highlights, but let's call it spotlights rather than highlights because it's less exclusive. So from our first talk this morning from Daniel Llewellyn, this will be a talk from deep within the Ubuntu community. I'll tell you more in a moment. Again, from the open source software community, Muhewe from Namibia, with a view from quite a different part of the world. We have a couple of technical sessions on packaging, on rocks, snaps, later applications of Ubuntu for robotics, for music. So we have all kinds of different things at different times. Whatever you're interested in, your problem will be deciding which one to go to, not that there isn't anything interesting on, and that's for sure. So I'm not going to take any more of your time. I think we're ready to get started now. We'll give Danny a couple of minutes to get yourself sorted out here. Let's find out what you need to connect. Have a wonderful day, everyone.